Let's walk through what's going on the stand right now because it sounds rather intense. The defense has called Robert Costello as a witness. He was a lawyer who at one point had advised Michael Cohen. In the last few weeks, he has been coming out and saying that Michael Cohen is lying about him on the stand. He testified before Congress, before Republicans in Congress. And some of what's going on right now is, for instance, Costello said that Cohen told him 10 to 12 times during their meeting, I swear to God, Bob, I don't have anything on Donald Trump. So he is there to impeach the credibility of Michael Cohen. But what's going on is that Costello is really expressing disdain for Judge Merchan's rulings. Costello shakes his head as if he was exasperated when Judge Merchan sustained an objection from the prosecution about one of the answers. At another time, when the prosecution objected, Merchan told the lawyers to approach the bench, and Costello could be heard saying on the microphone, ridiculous, just saying ridiculous while the attorneys are at sidebar. Then at another time, there was another objection which was sustained. Costello lets out a Jesus. That's my interpretation, but that's how one says such a thing when they're frustrated. Merchan leans forward and says to the witness, Mr. Costello, sorry. And then Beauvais returns, no. And then at one point, the judge actually asks for the trial to take a minute. He tells the jury to leave the room. This is a pretty extreme thing to do. And he tells Costello in a raised voice.
Jake, the judge has just cleared the entire courtroom.
Yeah.
It appears that now this is escalated to a security concern and the overflow is cut. We're not getting any more information. I mean, the fact that this has escalated to this extent, this is part of why there was disagreement within the Trump world about whether they should call Bob Costello. The only reason he is being called is because the client insisted that he be called. There were people on Trump's team that thought he would be too much of a liability. And
Paula,
the fact that the judge has now reprimanded him for staring him down, this is really taking a turn.
So, that's I was getting to that. He told Costello in a raised voice when he told the jury to leave, Mr. Costello, you're to remain seated. The jury leaves. Then Costello, after another sustained objection, Costello rolls his eyes, lets out an audible sigh, side glances the judge. The judge says, I want to discuss proper decorum in my courtroom. The judge says, you don't give me a side eye and you don't roll your eyes. The judge says, when there's a witness on the stand, if you don't like my ruling, you don't say geez, you don't say strike it. Costello holds a long glare at the judge. Judge Merchan says, are you staring me down? Then the judge says, clear the courtroom. There's yelling by security officers at the press to leave. The video is cut. Court security says nobody can come back in. Paula, you have a JD. You've been covering court cases for quite some time. Have you ever seen anything like this?
No, this is unbelievable, and I know Bob Costello quite well. I've talked to him for about a decade. The fact that he would allow this to happen on the stand, it suggests in many ways that he is probably posturing for the defendant. Remember, it's the defendant that overrode his own defense attorneys. They said this is not a good idea. Do not put Costello on the stand. He overrode them because he loved Costello's performance in Congress last week, where he attacked not only Bob Costello, but also this case and the judge. So the fact that Costello would conduct himself in a trial like this, potentially jeopardize a case like this, I am actually pretty surprised, but it validates the concerns that have been expressed by members of Trump's defense team about why they did not want to call Costello, and also reminds us why when the defendant calls the shots and not the defense attorneys, you can have something like this happen.
And Paula, I mean, Bob Costello, he is an attorney, right? I mean, he knows how important it is, more than the average Joe on the street, to show respect and deference to a judge's rulings. I mean, these are just objections that are being sustained. I was there last week or the week before, and, you know, Judge Merchan sustains objections from both the prosecution and the defense. I know the defense doesn't think he's fair, but as a general note, what I saw seemed, you know, in keeping with courtroom proceedings. For him to do that, that's knowing hostility. I mean, that is knowing animosity towards a judge's ruling.
Jake, this is unbelievable that he would engage in this kind of conduct, force the entire courtroom to be cleared. I reiterate, there have always been concerns about Costello. Costello is the only defense witness called before the grand jury in this case. His testimony, he said, resonated with the grand jury, but he didn't stave off an indictment. He was not expected to be called until late last week when Trump said he had to be called. This is so over the top, undermining everything the defense has tried to do for their client over the past week or so. It's unclear what impact this is going to have on the case itself, but this is exactly why certain members of the defense team did not want to call him. But again, I've dealt with him for a decade. I am pretty shocked that this is the way that he's behaving on the stand. Look, he has animus towards Michael Cohen, no doubt. He also has some ill will towards the judge. But the fact that he would engage in this kind of behavior in a criminal courtroom in a historic case of this nature is truly shocking.
Yeah, and members of the media and the people in the gallery are being allowed back into the courtroom. Let me get my panel to weigh in here, and I apologize ahead of time, per usual, for when I interrupt you to tell you what's going on inside the courtroom. But first, let me start with Caitlin Polans, who's been covering this now for quite some time. I'm pretty surprised. What about you?
I'm pretty surprised, but Jake, this is maintaining order in the court.
No, I'm surprised that Bob Costello, who is a member of the bar, would say Jesus when a judge makes a ruling he doesn't like, and he's not the defendant. He's a witness.
Yeah, and staring at the judge, sighing, rolling his eyes. That's clearly not the sort of behavior that you would expect out of a witness. And we can't say exactly why he's doing what he's doing, but he is quite an experienced attorney, and he is in this circle of people around Donald Trump who's been on the legal side of things more often than in this sort of position as a witness. He was Steve Bannon's lawyer. He was Rudy Giuliani's lawyer. He has been a lawyer in these cases for quite some time. In this context, he's a legal advisor to Michael Cohen, trying to put that fine point for the defense team that Michael Cohen's a lying liar who lies.
Yeah.
Whether that's going to come across because of this level of disruption remains to be seen and will be for the jury to decide.
Lisa Adamson, what do you think? What do you make of it all?
I mean, I am really shocked. The only time I've ever seen a courtroom cleared is when there's an actual security concern.
Sounds like Robert Costello, who was that individual who was briefly counseling Michael Cohen for a couple months in 2018 and is testifying here that Cohen had told him that he did this all independently of Donald Trump, and he never informed Donald Trump of the Stormy Daniels payment. This is now sort of a key witness here for the defense team. But with the jury in the room, clearly Judge Merchan very peeved to the point that he asked the jury and the press to leave, and they are now just only being let back in.
Okay, so I have some of this transcript that Vaughn is just reading out to our audience. Merchan says, quote, I'd like to discuss, these are from our correspondent, our program's correspondent, Lisa Ferry, in the courtroom. I'd like to discuss proper decorum in my courtroom, Merchan says. If you don't like my ruling, you don't say geez. You don't say strike it because I'm the only one who can strike it. From the record, Judge Merchan, you don't give me side eye and you don't roll your eyes. Costello, I understand. Merchan, clear the courtroom. This seems like, it seems very theatrical. This seems very Trumpian. What sort of damage can it do in the eyes of the jury?
Can I just say, I have been in a situation where I have had to and gotten court permission to have a lawyer for somebody testify. Those lawyers are dispassionate and careful, and they are only going to answer questions that they legally have to answer because they have a continuing duty of loyalty to their client or sometimes former client. Mm-hmm. And I would know in that situation that they were being completely ethical and trying to adhere to their continuing duties to their client. This is the antithesis of that from what we're seeing.
And just remind everybody who Costello is.
So Costello is somebody who Michael Cohen spoke to and had an attorney-client privileged relationship but ultimately didn't hire. He has worked with Rudy Giuliani, and there has been evidence introduced, and this also came up in the Mueller investigation, suggesting that he and others were part of an effort to try to get Michael Cohen not to cooperate. It'll be interesting to see how much that plays out on cross. his behavior in the courtroom, let's just say it is not consonant with what I have seen with somebody thinking about their obligations to that client or prospective client, and isn't coming off as dispassionate.
Yeah, I mean, Suzanne Craig, you've watched all of this. I've read it all, which is a distant second to seeing it. I've not read Mershon this upset in every day of the trial transcript that I've read.
No, and I think what's really important about it is how much the jury reads him. You always see in these trials I've sat through, this is my third one, and the jury and the judge have a real relationship. And I think this is it's a big error on Trump's team's part to have this sort of exchange happening in the courtroom. They really pick up on what the judge is thinking, and I think it works against whoever's doing this, which happens to be Trump in this instance.
It's so ironic that everybody was saying, oh, Michael's going to, be glib or bust or unravel. Yeah. 25 hours on the stand, nothing. This guy's on the stand for a half hour. So that tells you something. And Andrew, obviously, you know this infinitely better than any of us. That has to play on a jury. When you see a judge behaving that way, it destroys the credibility of that witness. I mean, it's just, he might as well say, don't believe this guy.
And they've got some smart jurors on there, including, but two lawyers, too, who, have seen this sort of thing before. They've been in courtrooms, I'm sure. They're going to be reading this.
I mean, judges like jurors. I mean, and jurors like judges.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, judges
they need each other. That's the
they're like
exactly.
They're advocates.
Disrespecting a judge as a witness, it's just not a good thing, and especially because it's going to feed the reason